made a pact with the devil. That was the subject line of the email I received from a subscriber. He asked me to narrate the horror story of his life. Get ready to hear about the horrors a young man faced after making a pact with the devil. But before we begin, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any sinister content like this. Remember, whether you believe the story or not is up to you. In the email, there was a name, but to protect the sender, I'll call him Pedro. Pedro, a desperate young man, decided to summon the devil and make a pact. He wanted money, success, and power, and he was willing to pay whatever price was necessary. Pedro lit some candles and began reciting an ancient ritual he had found on the internet. He didn't truly believe anything would happen, but he wanted to try anyway. To his surprise, Pedro felt a presence materializing in the room. He turned and saw a tall, elegant man wearing a black suit. "You called me?" the man asked with a malicious smile on his lips. Pedro was frightened but also excited. He knew this was his chance to get what he wanted. The devil explained that he was willing to make a deal with Pedro, but there would be a price to pay. He offered success, money, and power in exchange for Pedro's soul. The young man hesitated for a moment, but then decided to accept. He signed a contract with his fingers' blood, and the devil disappeared. In the following days, Pedro noticed his life changing. He got a better job, earned more money than he had ever dreamed of, and met influential and powerful people who helped him advance in his career. Pedro was happy, but also began to feel constant fear. He knew he had made a pact with the devil, and there was a price to pay. One sleepless night, Pedro heard a voice whispering in his ear, reminding him of the agreement he had made. He jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights in his apartment. He dreamed of demons and monsters chasing him, trying to drag him to hell. He woke up sweating and trembling, unable to fall back asleep. Pedro started to feel like his life was turning into a real hell. One day, he received a strange letter with no sender, but it contained a simple message: "I'm coming to collect what is mine." Pedro shivered, knowing the devil was demanding the price of their agreement. He saw the devil again, sitting in his favorite armchair, smoking a cigar. "Are you ready to pay the price?" the devil asked. Pedro knew he had no choice. He would have to fulfill the agreement he had made. The devil smiled and said, "Very well, let's begin." He reached out and touched Pedro's shoulder. Suddenly, Pedro felt a sharp pain and fell to the ground unconscious. When he woke up, he saw a strange mark on his shoulder, an ancient symbol he didn't recognize. He tried to wash it off, but it wouldn't come off. Pedro realized it would be a constant reminder of the pact he had made with the devil. From that day on, strange things started happening to Pedro. He saw shadows moving in the darkness, heard voices whispering in his ear, and felt a malevolent presence around him. He tried to ignore it all, but he knew he couldn't escape the pact he had made. As time went on, Pedro became more and more paranoid and scared. He lost his job, his friends, and his sanity. He saw demons everywhere, heard voices commanding him to do terrible things. Pedro knew he was losing the battle against the devil. Desperate, Pedro sought help from every possible source: priests, mediums, even exorcists, but nothing seemed to work. He knew he was doomed to live in a personal hell for the rest of his life. One day, Pedro decided he couldn't live in that reality anymore. He wanted to escape, forget everything, and start over. He sold everything he had and bought a ticket to a remote island, hoping to find peace. But the island was not the paradise Pedro had imagined. There was something strange and dark about those deserted beaches. Pedro felt like he was being watched, followed, and chased. He didn't know if it was real or just his imagination. One day, Pedro met an old native who lived on the island. The old man told him a story about an ancient tribe that had made a pact with the devil many years ago. Pedro was horrified to hear it, but also felt a strange connection to the story. That night, Pedro had a terrible nightmare. He dreamed he was on the island, thousands of years ago, watching the tribe that had made the pact with the devil. He saw how they worshipped the devil and offered human sacrifices in exchange for power and wealth. Pedro woke up drenched in sweat and realized it wasn't just a dream. It was a memory of a past life. From that moment on, Pedro began to investigate more about the island's history. He discovered evidence of human sacrifices, macabre rituals, and dealings with the devil. He realized it was an endless cycle of destruction and death. One dark and stormy night, Pedro heard a voice calling him from the forest by the sea. He felt an invisible force pulling him towards the darkness. He fought against it, but it was too strong. He found himself being dragged without being able to resist. Exhausted, Pedro passed out. When he woke up, he found himself in a place he didn't recognize. He was lying in a bed in an unfamiliar room with dim light. His head was pounding and he felt dizzy. He got up slowly and walked to the door, trying to open it, but it was locked. He started screaming for help, but no one answered. He began to feel a deep fear and a sense that something terrible was happening. After some time, Pedro heard footsteps approaching the door. He recoiled in fear of what might be behind it. The doorknob turned, and a man entered the room. He was tall and had a strange appearance, with a sadistic smile on his face. Pedro felt a chill run down his spine as the man grabbed his arm and pushed him back onto the bed. The man introduced himself as one of the devil's henchmen and said that Pedro couldn't escape the pact he had made. He left the room, locking the door again, and Pedro was alone, not knowing what to do. In the following days, Pedro tried to escape several times but was always thwarted by the devil's henchmen. He began to have strange and frightening visions of mutilated bodies and voices whispering in his ear. His body also started to change, with strange marks appearing on his skin and his eyes turning increasingly red. Pedro couldn't distinguish reality from the visions he had. He felt lost in the chaos. One night, after a slip-up by the henchmen, Pedro managed to escape. He walked for hours, trying to distance himself from his captors, but he saw strange shadows following him and heard the whispering voices again. He felt that deep fear and the sense that something terrible was about to happen. Completely desperate and not knowing what to do, Pedro felt trapped in an endless nightmare, pursued by the devil himself. All his attempts to escape the fate he had chosen seemed futile. After spending days in isolation, Pedro decided he needed to try again to find a way to break the pact. He began researching the devil and witchcraft, looking for information that could help him. It was during this search that Pedro discovered an ancient ritual that could break a pact with the devil. The ritual was dangerous and complex, but Pedro was willing to try anything to free himself from the devil. He decided to seek out a specialist in rituals to help him perform the process. After much searching, Pedro finally found a man who claimed to have experience in rituals and black magic. He agreed to help Pedro, but demanded a high payment for his services. With little choice, Pedro agreed to the terms and proceeded with the plan. The ritual was performed, and Pedro was very nervous but also hopeful. It was a long and intense process, with the ritual specialist chanting and invoking powers from beyond. When the ritual was over, the man turned to Pedro and said he had succeeded in breaking the pact with the devil. Pedro felt a great relief, finally feeling free from the burden he had been carrying. He thanked the man and left, feeling like he could finally start his life anew. However, Pedro's relief was short-lived. In the days that followed, he began to feel a strange sensation, as if something were wrong. He started having even more intense nightmares than before, and the terrifying visions continued to haunt him. Pedro began to suspect that the ritual specialist hadn't truly broken the pact with the devil. He decided to search again for a solution, but now he knew he needed to be even more careful. Pedro was determined to end it all once and for all, even if it meant risking everything he had. He knew he couldn't continue living in fear and uncertainty. Pedro still trembled with fear as he remembered the recent events. He tried desperately to find a way to escape the devil's pursuit, but it seemed there was no way out. The strange and terrifying visions continued to haunt him, even when he was awake. One day, Pedro decided to seek help from a local priest. He explained the situation to the priest, who listened attentively, and then suggested that he recite a prayer of protection and renounce the pact he had made. Pedro followed the priest's suggestion and prayed with all his faith. In the following days, things seemed to have improved slightly for Pedro. He didn't have any more visions or terrifying nightmares, and the feeling of being pursued by the devil diminished. But unfortunately, this peace didn't last long. One night, Pedro woke up with a feeling that something was wrong. He felt a chill run down his spine as he looked around the room and saw a dark and sinister figure standing in the corner. It was the devil who had returned to claim what was his. Pedro tried to flee, but the shadowy figure approached quickly and grabbed his arm tightly. The young man screamed for help, but no one seemed to hear him. The devil stared into his eyes and spoke, saying that they were bound by the pact, and this union was forever. Pedro passed out, and when he woke up, it seemed like he had slept for several days. It felt like everything had been nothing but a terrible nightmare. In the days that followed, he had no visions or nightmares, didn't hear voices, and felt no fear. But Pedro knew that one day he would have to pay for the deal he made with the devil. And so ends the story of the young man who made a pact with the devil. I hope you enjoyed following this terrifying tale with me. Remember, whether you believe it or not is your choice. If you liked the video, don't forget to leave your like and share it with your friends. And of course, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now so you don't miss any sinister content like this. I recommend watching the video in the card. It's very scary and you'll be terrified. Until next time, and beware of what you wish for. You never know who might be listening. Take care and see you soon.